Hey everybody, Jack Hinkle here. Welcome to Chops Podcast. Today we've got a really special episode with Chris Munce from the Choralosophy Podcast. And Chris's podcast is all about the philosophy of choir. So we talked on a video call and talked all things band and choir and how band can relate to choir and how choir can relate to band and what each teacher could learn and take from each other. So this was a really awesome discussion, and we're going to throw it to that audio. Hope you enjoy.
All right, everybody. This is a fun and different kind of episode for Choralosophy people. So welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast in collaboration with
Chops Podcast, and thank you so much for Choralosophy Podcast for joining Chops Podcast. Should be a grand old time.
I'm Chris Munce, and who are you?
And I am Jack Hinkle. And thank you for doing this.
So this is going to be lots of fun. Tell us first about Chops Podcast. What does it do? What is it for? How'd you start it? Tell us the whole story.
Sure. So Chops Podcast was originally about a year and a half ago with my co-host Steve Peterson, and we started this back in the summer of 23, I believe. So yeah, about a year and a half ago. And Steve and I work together here at Concord High School where we teach band. And it started actually as a collaboration between the two of us at a professional development conference where our school system asked teachers to present. And we team teach a lot of classes, and we wanted to present as a team. And we really enjoyed kind of the collaboration behind that and felt that it was kind of easy to have some conversations. So it evolved into a podcast. And the three cornerstones of Chops is knowing your content, knowing your teaching, and knowing your students. And we're both band directors, so it's pretty band centric. However, we do try and make it as relevant for what we say is like a 7th grade science teacher. So making it a little more cross-platform and talking just about best practices in the classroom and how that can relate to any teacher. So that's kind of our pitch. Tell us about Choralosophy.
So Choralosophy is a little older than that. We started here in February of 2019. So we just hit our 6-year anniversary recently. It is a choir-centered podcast, but similar to what you've described there, I make an effort to be as broad across the music education spectrum as I can, not in every episode, but over the course of a year. It's a weekly show. So I produce a show every week. And so I do try to sprinkle in the occasional type of show that might be more wide ranging than just choir related. So how do young kids learn music, like what's going on in their brain, the neuroscience of music, those types of things that I think are just really interesting and cool. And they do impact us both, band and choir teachers. When kids get to that high school age, there's a lot of certain, early childhood types of things that if they don't get those experiences, they're not going to be very good singers in choir, and they're not going to be very good players in band either. And so that trying to wrap the whole music education spectrum up, but definitely kind of focused on choir. Other interesting thing about Choralosophy is that I try to also sprinkle in just things about how to teach the voice, like how to teach kids to use their voice. Also, we sprinkle in things like social justice topics. We talk about the modern issues that teachers face. So we might even talk about broader educational system issues sometimes. So basically, if I think it's interesting and it's sticking in my craw, I'll talk about it.
And you typically record with a different guest each week. Is that kind of the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Every once in a while I'll do a solo episode. If there's something almost like if there was a topic that I would normally want to present at a conference on, then I just present it here. And then people can use it that way as professional development.
Perfect. So could you you told Chops a little bit about Choralosophy. Can you tell Chops a little bit about Chris?
Ooh, that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay. So I am a high school choir teacher in the Kansas City area, suburb called Lee Summit. I'm also in a team teaching program. It's a relatively large program, 220 singers in choir. But then my partner and I each teach classes by ourselves. So I have a chamber choir by myself in addition to that 220 during the school day. And then
Wow.
she has her own chamber choir. And then I teach music appreciation by myself. She has an adaptive music class by herself. So all together, we're basically, serving about 275 students. But 220 of them are choir specific. And then I also direct a professional choir here in Kansas City.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
yeah, yeah, and I've been doing that since like 2009.
And what's that
So,
called?
Contour IKC
Okay.
is the name of the group, and it's like a gig based kind of group. We're not like that. We do pay our singers, which is cool. Players are used to getting paid. Singers, typically, we're not. So I tried really hard to create a group that I could. At least make it worth singers' time to show up and have it be a professional level ensemble, and we've just been building that ever since. Who's Jack?
Very cool. Yeah, I teach at Concord High School. We're in Elkhart, Indiana, so we're about 30 minutes east of Notre Dame, to kind of make that into perspective. I'm in my 8th year of teaching at Concord, and I'm a band director, but I do teach a lot of different things. I teach 2 concert bands every day. I teach 2 jazz bands every day, and then I teach a piano class as well as AP music theory. And my
Okay.
job is kind of shifted around from year to year based on kind of who's here and what kind of kids or what the enrollment is that we need to serve. So a lot of kids, and our program at Concord is pretty fortunate to be big. And our marching band during the fall runs around 220, 230 when our school size is about 1,700. So we're very fortunate to have the amount of kids. And I'm on a band staff of 6 full-time teachers and
Whoa.
probably about, I want to say like 11 or 12 music teachers, including orchestra and choir at the high school level. So it's a really busy time here with a lot of people and a lot of kids, but it's also a lot of fun. And
That's awesome.
outside of school, I do enjoy playing, and I do some like gigging on guitar and singing in the off time when I can. And I really have started to enjoy going on runs, which if you would have looked at me like 7 years ago and I see myself say that, I would have said no way. But that's kind of what I like to do in my free time.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
very cool. Now, I'm curious. So you said 6 full-time band teachers. Do those band teachers, do you guys have to travel from building to building? So like, do you teach younger kids too?
Yeah. So we have Steve is the like department chair, the music director, and he has kind of more of an administrative role and teaches only 2 classes a day, and then is an administrator for the music performing arts program district wide for the rest of the
I
day.
see.
I'm full time at
Hmm.
the high school, and then we have 2 band directors as well as our percussion specialist who travel between the buildings. And then we have a full-time dance teacher / color guard teacher here at the high school. So it's,
Wow.
yeah, we do have some of those traveling teachers to kind of make it all work.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, our school is um, 2 full-time band, and they both travel. So
Okay.
one is kind of wears the hat of the band director. The other is percussion specialist, but even the percussion specialist has a couple of bands that he teaches by himself, and they both travel to other buildings at certain points during the day. And then all of our color guard stuff is like a part-time person that's
Got it.
brought in. And
Okay.
then we have 2 full-time choir but also a full-time accompanist, and then 1 full-time orchestra. And we're a school of our school is bigger than yours, which is interesting. So we are 1,950
Okay.
students ish,
Okay.
and the orchestra and band programs are fairly large too. So
Great.
I'm gonna send that clip to my administrators, and we will surely be hiring 3 or 4 more
That,
teachers for next year.
perfect. Perfect. Glad to help. That's awesome. Yeah, we have and we have a choir teacher, and he teaches most of the day at the high school and then travels to the junior high to teach 1 class. But he's a really good teacher, and he also has a full time accompanist who she is incredible, and she not only accompanies, but she can take kids out and do some sectionals and kind of work with them, and so the 2 of them make a really good 1-2 punch.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
That's
awesome.
awesome.
That's very cool. So that actually might be a really good segue into us talking about just like what is it like to teach band versus what is it like to teach choir? Like where is the intersection, but then where are those kind of crucial differences? Now, of course, some of that is going to vary from program to program,
Sure.
obviously. But it sounds like band is kind of like a big deal at your school. Is that true?
We like to think so. Yeah, we like to think
Yeah.
so. We have a really rich history and tradition of having a large band program, and really since the like 80s and 70s, we were kind of known as having this very large marching band, and it just kind of never went away. And the program was really flourishing and have 5 state titles in marching band over that time, and our concert bands, of course, are and jazz bands are great too. And a lot of kids and a lot of teachers, a lot of parents to make everything work. So we're really fortunate to have that here. And then in addition to the marching band, we've got 3 concert bands at the school and 3 jazz bands during the school day, plus an after-school jazz band. So there's a lot going on. And I think
Yeah.
in our choirs, I want to say we have 4 full-time choirs at the high school, possibly more. So yeah, a lot going on.
Yeah. So, all right. So, are you okay doing some like nerdy, how to teach kids stuff
Oh,
questions?
yeah, let's go. Let's nerd out. That's what we
Okay.
love to
All
do.
right. So, all right. So, in band, you've got beginners that have never picked up an instrument before, and it's what grade? By the way, what grade is that in your district? Where they start?
6th grade is when they start. Is that
That's where we
similar?
start too. All right.
Okay.
So sixth graders, and presumably, when you've got a beginning trumpet player, not only do they come in not knowing how to play the trumpet, they probably have never picked one up before, maybe prior to their rental day or or whatever,
Sure.
right? So, what would you say is kind of like the goal for a first year trumpet student in band? If you were to describe that, like what are the things they should be able to do by the
Interesting.
end of the year?
Now, I will preface this with I have never taught at the beginning level for band, which is
Sure.
kind of interesting. But, I would hope that by the end of the year, and if we're talking like micro, like what that kid can do musically, I mean, I would hope that they can read music on their treble clef at a 6th grade level. So we would be talking like quarter notes, eighth notes, half notes, whole notes, all that stuff.
Yep.
Have the technique skills here in their embouchure to be able to play from like low C on the staff to high C, and that they can play, I'm sorry, middle C in the staff, C5 for them, and that they can play in an ensemble and make the ensemble better through their blend, dynamics, tone, articulation, all that stuff. Macro level, that kid is having an experience that makes them want to come back, that makes the kids around them want to come back, and that they're having fun and that they're appreciating music in ways that they haven't been able to before. Now,
Wow.
if you're
That's a good explanation.
thank you. Now, if you're looking at
Yeah.
choir, that kind of fascinates me because you're talking about the kid who's never picked up a trumpet before. These kids have been using their voice for,
Yep.
14 years if they're joining their freshman choir, and everyone has sung at some point, even if it's like the craziest version of Happy Birthday you've heard at a Chili's. But,
Right.
what does that look like when they come into your room?
Right. And so, okay, so that's really interesting because I agree. It is that's the distinction I was wanting to get to, is that in choir, in many ways, it's easier to teach kids because it is an extension of the speaking voice, but in some certain other ways, it's harder. And I was a band kid too, and and my mother was as well, and so there's a little frame of reference there. But you could think of it like remodeling a house is oftentimes more expensive if you have to gut the whole thing than just building a house on an empty piece of land, because of the surgical extraction of prior things that are gross, and then and then having to rebuild something beautiful in an existing frame. And so for young singers, that is oftentimes what happens, is that they might have come with a voice that they've been using, but maybe they've been using it in a very unhealthy or unproductive way. And they have to, in a lot of ways, unlearn a whole bunch
Wow.
of things. And then, oh, by the way, the house magically is going through puberty. If houses could do that. So I guess maybe to keep my stupid analogy going, the beams of the house are also changing shapes and sizes as we remodel. And the thing that they were able to do, 6 weeks ago, they're no longer able to do because the vocal folds have changed sizes dramatically, and now they have to relearn it. So oftentimes I make the joke that I think, just to keep it fair between band and choir, that we should invent puberty instruments. Kids come to band, and 6 weeks later, their trumpet is just 4 times bigger, and they're just going to have to deal with it. And so all these types of things that are the things that we deal with in choir. But I want to go back to a question that you about one of the things you said about what a trumpet player, the hypothetical beginning trumpet player, would be able to do. So you listed some literacy requirements, or just things that you would hope that over the course of the first year, they would be fairly able to tackle eighth note rhythms, certain range of the trumpet, certain types of scales, I'm assuming, that you would hope that they would learn in that first year. What would you think about kids that arrive to you in ninth grade that aren't able to do any of those things? In other words, would you be concerned about how they were taught when they in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, if they get there and they look at the music that you hand out and they have no idea what to do?
I would be concerned for sure. And we have at our junior high, we allow our students from 6th grade and 7th grade to participate in the beginning class. And if they want to join in 8th grade, they have to go back to that beginning class as well. So if they try to join high school with having nothing, it's usually sorry, but we can't make this work. But you're talking about if they move in from another district and that they may be behind or struggling on those things that we want.
No, not really. I was talking. I mean, but yes, in that situation. But I'm talking about it's hypothetical. It's a thought experiment. If you in your district, you were getting kids that come from maybe a feeder program where they just don't teach those things. I'm helping us make another analogy between choir and band.
Oh,
because
I got
it
you.
happens in vocal music. It all happens all the time.
Sure.
All the time. In fact,
go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was going to say, in fact, in vocal music, oftentimes we have arguments about this stuff. We have arguments about whether or not we even should be teaching it to kids because it's exclusionary and we shouldn't be expecting them to read music. And if, because not all cultures read music and all that kind of stuff. So it's a whole thing. And I don't think you talk about that.
We don't talk about that. Well, that's really interesting too. And this is something that I'm working through, just like for some context. So I said I'm teaching AP music theory, and of one of the struggles or places we want to be is sight singing, right? And so I am in my day now, I'm going to use air quotes, teaching choir, try and help kids with those skills. And something I've noticed, to kind of answer your question, is that if you're in band or orchestra, everything's tactile, right? Like you have to touch things to make your rhythm happen. But if you're in choir, it's this translucent thing that is really difficult. Yes. And if you tell a kid that they played the wrong fingering when it's this and it should be this, the kid goes, oh. But when you tell your choir kid or your AP music theory kid, you sang me, but it sounded like fa, they go, did I? And you're like, yes, you did, but there's no tangible evidence of that, And so I could totally see how some choir students could be different coming from where they're coming from based on who's teaching them, because there's no touch, there's no hitting, there's striking or tonguing or anything. And that's just so difficult. So back to kind of your question, a band could not survive without that stuff. And the level of rote teaching that could go on in the room based on the giant score from top to bottom is totally different from if you had to rote teach a choir that could be singing in 1, 2, or 3 parts.
Yep.
That's fascinating. Yep. So can you talk a little bit more about that, like this argument between that?
Yeah, so it's the argument in the vocal music and choir world is oftentimes it's not and I don't want to make it sound like it's common for choir teachers to just say we shouldn't teach kids to read music at all. That's not what I'm saying. That would be a very fringe opinion,
Okay.
like a very very out there, but it does exist. um, the fringe opinion. The real substance of the argument is really how much should we expect them to know how to do independently without our help. So, in other words, how much is fair to expect, and that really comes down to how much time should we really be spending on that? Are there more important things that we could be doing? And of course, my argument usually is that there are lots of important things. And one of the ways that I get to all those important things in my classroom is I teach kids to read really well.
Great.
And so then when like a band student would, we pass out the music and they have the skills to know how to just like make it sound like that. And with relatively small amount of rehearsal so that we can have time for all those other things, so that I'm not having to teach complicated 8-part charts by rote and make them all sit there doing nothing while the soprano section learns their part
Sure.
or whatever, which oftentimes does have to happen in beginning band unless they are instrument specific classes. And I'm not sure how that works in your district. My son plays clarinet, and he got to take clarinet class first, where that's all they did. But so that's essentially the issue. Is in choir world there's disagreement about the pedagogy of how to get kids, because of all those things you described, the lack of tactile visual external factors, which is why a lot of choirs do the solfege hand signs.
Yes.
Like the do re mi stuff, because you can see it and they can do rhythms with it.
Okay.
Stuff like that. So that's essentially that's the nutshell of the argument.
Got it. So when
Yeah.
we had talked ahead of time, you had pitched the idea of what can band learn from the choir and what can choir learn from band, and how
Yes.
how that kind of translates. So I've got an idea, or not really an idea, but just something that we've done, and then I'd love to hear yours. But something that we started doing in our bands probably 2 years ago is sing every day. And we had
I was going to bring that up. I'm so glad you brought that up. Say more.
Great. Okay. So we had a teacher from elsewhere in Indiana come work with our marching band, and he told us that if you sing, it will just fix all of your intonation issues. And we have started doing that, and it started like very basically. I mean, band is like F concert centric. Like that's kind of our warm up where we live every day. It's the first note the kids play. And that's where we started, is we would like have the drone playing F, we sing F, and then the band plays F. And then it would be playing intervals, like a Remington exercise, and then singing the intervals. And then it eventually became to we'd be singing in our marching band show. And we would just sing our parts, and then we would play the notes, and we'd sing a chord and then play the chord. And it's kind of like what you were talking about with teaching your kids to read. Through teaching our kids to sing, we're starting to play more in tune and more in tune automatically. And it's not perfect, but I have noticed a difference over the last 2 years that by the, our contest season, when we're in panic mode trying to put everything together, we're not as much worried about the pitch things as we are other things. And I think that the singing thing has just really helped the kids, and it's helped us as a staff kind of help to learn to teach it better.
Yeah. Yeah. I apologize for the noise in the background. My family has forgotten the rules of when I'm recording.
I'm at school right now. I wanted to be safe haven from noise. So I get it.
I got you. Okay, so that is fascinating, and that's awesome. And again, I'll just do another nerd disclaimer, because my response to that is going to be very nerdy.
I'm in.
Are you ready? Okay.
Hit me.
So, all right. So are you familiar with the product or the digital product Sight Reading Factory?
Yes.
Okay. So they've been one of my main affiliates here on the show, and I plug them like crazy. And one of the things that I've been that the folks that do Sight Reading Factory and I have been tooling around and trying to figure out a way to make work is for me to go to a bandmasters competition. Sorry, not competition, conference. You know what I mean? Those big, the bandmasters conferences, to present on this very thing. which is to make the argument to instrumental teachers everywhere that you should all be singing every day in rehearsal. And essentially the argument is that music is more of a language than I think a lot of us have been taught to think of it as, and more similar to language in the way we think about all languages than many of us as music teachers have been taught to think about and understand. And I've got like a bunch of episodes on that topic. That's like one of my big wheelhouse nerd topics is. And so here's what basically happens when humans who are verbal mimic creatures, we're one of only a few species on the planet that can verbally mimic sound that we hear. When I am hearing you talk and when you are hearing me talk without even knowing it, the muscles of our larynx that recreate the language that we are about to speak are like practicing as we listen. So they are configuring themselves around inside. A lot of them are involuntary muscles preparing us to respond. So when we are hearing a pitch, we are preparing and getting ready to sing. If we are about to sing a pitch or an interval, we have to hear it in our head accurately if we are to reproduce it accurately, which forces us, if we have to sing it first, it forces us to hear it in tune, which means that we have to audiate. So it's the whole Edwin Gordon music learning theory, Kodai, that, the Kodai concept too, that singing is the foundation of all musicianship. And the reason for that is I think that linguistic connection between the idea that I'll go a slightly different direction. If I'm a piano player, for an example, I don't actually have to hear what a C sounds like to play a C. I just have to know what a C, where it is, and I have to know when to push it down. And then typically over the course of my study of piano, I will start to learn what C sounds like, but I don't have to do it the other way around. Like I don't have to hear it first. But of course, the other issue with piano is you don't have to tune a piano while you play it. It's either in tune or out of tune.
Yeah, sometimes you wish you could.
Yeah, sometimes you wish you could. So the point being, stringed instruments, wind instruments, the types of instruments that you have to tune as you go, even microtones. If the singers are singing every day, it's going to force them to learn to hear those pitches and intervals before they play them, which will allow the intonation to slip into phase a whole lot quicker, because they're not going to rely on a teacher to have to tell them to listen for it. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thoughts?
No, I'm totally with you. I think you're talking about the humans as mimicking in language. I think that is something that, the kids in band and orchestra are for sure doing, but they have never thought about that. I mean, that's something that happens all the time. And, we try and mimic it through what we do. And, and especially with the more vocal senses of band, like with articulation and tonguing, is something that's like easily translated. I actually taught beginning orchestra for 7 years. Up until this year, I'm not doing that anymore. But something that was interesting about that is that all of the note starts and note stops are all in your hands and your arms, which is like duh, but as someone who has taught band, it's much more difficult to start beginners with the correct articulation versus the band kids, because they've been using their tongue and their teeth and their vocal cords for 12 years, whereas this is not at all natural for any human ever until they've been doing it for 5 years. So that was something that I found was interesting, teaching, being like a band kid and going to college to teach band, even though I ended up teaching orchestra for a while, was that the beginner part of that was a lot more difficult.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. Yeah, that's also really interesting. I have another theory. Did you feel like, and feel free to not say yes just to entertain my theory, but did you feel like when you were teaching beginning orchestra that it was harder to get rhythm to happen than it was in beginning band?
Absolutely.
Or younger bands?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Same idea, right?
So this is how choir feels too. So choir, it's very, very difficult for us to get rhythm to happen unless we are really just spoon feeding them and like making them sing with a metronome, and then ultimately what that does a lot of times is just you take away the metronome and then they can't do it anymore. That kind of thing.
Sure.
And so my theory there is actually so nerdy that you would have to look at the sound waves on a spectrograph in order to understand it. Because in band, the sound wave of most of the band instruments, especially the percussion, but the wind and the brass as well, the very first puff of air or noise for a percussion or whatever is you hear the pitch and the beat, this gigantic burst of sound waves that just happens immediately. And it's easier to line that up because the sound just starts instantly. But with both the voice and the string, if you look at it on a spectrograph, it starts at almost nothing, and then in microseconds, of course, it crescendos to a tone. So there is, like, at the onset of the tone with both a violin and a human voice, at that very moment you think you're starting the sound, no one else in the ensemble can hear the sound yet. And so there's always like a delay.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I would never have thought of that.
And that's why choir directors have a reputation too for the way we conduct. We conduct typically with this almost like floppy hand.
Okay.
Like there's where's the beat? It's like, well, here's the beat that I want you to do, but then here's for the people watching the video, here's the beat that I want you to do, but here's the one I hear. Boom.
Gotcha.
Because it takes a second. There's a delay.
Chris is making a very flowy motion with the hand, and there's clearly a delay between when he wants the beat to happen and when it actually does, for those of you listening.
Yep. And we just get used to it, and like it's almost like it becomes its own internal sense of rhythm. And then of course singers do have consonants too that we're singing, so sometimes that's usually the best way for us to create a real clear band like attachment to the metronome. But cool. It is a different thing, different instrument, so to speak.
So I'm curious, like you brought up Sight Reading Factory. We use that like every day, especially in the I teach our top band and I teach our third band, and we use it like every day in the third band. We don't play notes, we just play rhythms. We have like a BenQ board, like a smart board up at the front of the room, and if it were to generate like the 4 transposed parts, it wouldn't go well, so we just have to kind of do rhythm only. But I'm curious, like I imagine since you brought it up that you're using it with your kids, and what does that look like in your classroom?
Yes. Now, first of all, you can do it with band, and it will automatically transpose if you are a one-to-one school where it can send out their parts to their specific instruments.
Ooh. Okay.
That is a thing you could do.
Okay. Just
so you know. And of course, you could also pay 10% less for it if you put in my promo code, but I won't talk about that. So, all right. So what it looks like for us is we start level 1 unison lines on the first day of school in 9th grade. And our kids come to us. This is not a dig on the middle school teachers that feed us, because it's not their fault. But we typically get kids coming to us with no reading ability at all, which is why I asked about that. Okay. Unless those kids are band and orchestra kids, in which case they come, dramatically ahead. Now, essentially, the problem in our district is that 6th graders get vocal music only for 1 quarter maximum. And then 7th graders and 8th graders each year, they only get half of a year maximum. So in a lot of ways, our middle school teachers our vocal music teachers are being asked to do the impossible if the goal is to send them like to high school already knowing how to do certain things. Like they're just, it's not a very equitable system. And then band is every day for all those age groups. So anyway, so they come to the beginning of 9th grade, and we start with level 1 unison. And one of the weird things that I do, it's weird for the choir world, is that we don't play notes for kids on the piano ever. So we don't play the notes while they sing them. We don't play them to demonstrate them. We just teach them to read, like from the very beginning. And we teach a very kind of on purpose formulaic style of learning to audiate or hear the pitches in their heads. And we, of course, do that sequentially with Sight Reading Factory over the course of the year. So they start level 1 unison. We take that same rehearsal approach into our repertoire so that we're building those same skills when we learn the music. And then by the time they're in, the end of ninth grade, oftentimes they're reading 3 or 4 part harmonies, very highly complicated lines, polyphonic types of things. And that happens oftentimes over the course of 1 year. In addition to that, we're also giving them individual assignments, and we are determining, kind of like, if you think about and I think this band and orchestra kids should be doing this too. This is my opinion, but being given individual levels for the individual reader, kind of like we did for kids when they were in kindergarten with leveled readers for their English. Like this is a level 4 reading trumpet player. And they should be reading at that level because it's a little too hard for them, but they can figure it out. Versus the kid who should be really working on level 2 so that he can just play accurately what he sees, that kind of thing. And then they progress. So our kids progress based on when they're reading fluently, we move them on to the next level. And so it's a combination of in-class work for the whole group, and then individual work on their own personalized level.
I want to go a little different direction with this, but I guess I have 2 questions. One, are you kind of instilling them like a relative pitch so that if they see a C, they can hear it and sing it?
That's a great question. That is not the way. We don't teach it to them that way, but that is the result for a lot of kids.
Oh, that's great. I'm just imagining, like you said, you don't give them notes on the piano. Like, how do they know what pitch they're starting on?
They hear the tonic. They hear the start of the scale.
Got it. And then, so if it starts on like me, they have to audiate me in their head, even if you give them do. Correct. Got it. Okay, cool. Yep. Second question, this is not really a choir thing. It's just like an education thing. You're talking about like assignments. Something that we've really struggled with is the turn-in rate of assignments. And I think that that's something that's gotten a little bit more slippery since COVID. And so I'm just curious, like how does that look at your school? And if kids don't turn stuff in, what's next step for you as the teacher?
Yeah, so we don't do a lot of assignments, and that's kind of how we thread the needle. Is we're like, guys, we're not doing this every day. It's not like you have choir homework every day. We do it basically every quarter.
Oh wow, okay.
That they have to do something on their own, and then turn it in. But again, then we mix in, because we're a 2-teacher program, and so all the classes are team taught. So we also periodically throughout the year pull kids out individually while one of us is leading a rehearsal.
Oh, cool.
And we have them do, so in addition to those assignments, we also are pulling them out a few times a year to check their progress and to see how they're doing on their own. And in those instances, we're giving them tips and feedback. Also, we're giving them like, well, on this note, you actually didn't get to the so, not because you said so, but you didn't actually sing the pitch. And I bet you if you blew more air through your instrument, so to speak, then you would have gotten to that pitch correctly. And that, those types of bits of feedback, so that they understand that reading with your voice is also vocal technique. Like you can look at it and think you sang the right thing, but if you were in the wrong vocal register, or you were under supporting or whatever. And so we can give them that type of feedback as they go along the way as well. But I would say we do have turn-in problems with some kids that just don't want to do anything outside of class ever, but it's not too bad. What does that look like? So when you say you've been struggling with it, what does that look like?
Well, there's usually just some kids that we need to continuously chase down to do some assignments. Oh, sure. Now we give more. I'd say we're once every other week with assignments, and trying to keep them short and achievable is kind of the main goal. I mean, they're usually, and I have more involved with the younger band, so I'm more creating assignments for that. But it's usually like a 4 to 8 measure etude or 4 to 8 measure chunk of their contest music, and it's something that they could probably 80% play. Like the individual kid can get 80% right away just from reading it. And it's more to just build the habit of taking the instrument home, opening the iPad, pressing record, and submit. And I think that's the part that gets in the way is the
I see.
opening iPad part.
Yep.
Because the
And
kids
just, yeah, it's an
come back.
added step. Do you guys have like a one of those learning software things? Like we have Schoology.
Okay, yeah,
And
we
are
use
these like
Canvas.
yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
same
embed it
idea.
into that?
We do. We do.
Hmm.
So yeah, just trying to make it easy. And then I imagine Kansas City is pretty climate okay, but we've been hit with some like e-learning days this year, like about 3 in a row, and we are. I think have to. I think we have to give assignments. So we do on those e-learning days, and
Yep.
those are the ones that really struggle for kids. And of course, there is some like equity issues with, these high school students might be the sole caregiver if mom and dad has to go to work and they're hanging out with the little siblings, and then there's an accessibility issue to complete work,
Right.
and who knows about the Wi-Fi situation. So I understand that
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. And yeah, we get that too. And our policy is that we understand that you're still going to have to do it though. If you like when we'll take it late.
Right.
But you're still going to have to do it. And so our kids do end up getting a few more assignments because of that as well, because of those snow days, the, alternative mode of instruction type days.
Yeah.
Now, what we do, and I think this, as far as those assignments, that makes it, I would say our turn-in rate is okay and getting better. Partly because when kids don't do it, we pull those kids aside and say like, okay, what's the real problem with the assignment? Like, are you struggling to get it set up? And then we have in our building, we have this kind of like advisory period time
Okay.
where we can bring kids to us that have
Okay.
not done something. And so we'll make them take out their Chromebooks and show us where the problem is. And then by the time they've done that, they usually don't have a problem anymore.
Fascinating,
And then,
right?
but it in a lot of ways, I have compassion for that kid because sometimes they just need to be shown that this is not as scary as you think. And so we give assignments in Sight Reading Factory, which has an auto assessment feature now. So they get an assignment at that customized level for them. So if they're level 1 reader, and we tell them their at-home assignment is sing 90% accuracy or better, and you're done. But if you don't get to 90% or better, turn in your 6th attempt, no matter what it was. And then we will consider that practice. And that is so even if you didn't get to 90%, we as teachers, we want to know that because that probably means we might have pushed you to a too hard of a level.
Okay.
And so you still get your credit though. You still get an A. Like so we like our 90%, for example, not 90%, it grades like it shows if notes are slightly flat or slightly sharp,
okay.
or a little bit early or a little bit late. And it does like a percentage, right? And so even if they turn in 91%, they get 100% in the grade book. It's just they did their practice for that assignment, and that's really all we're asking them to do. The kids are telling us it takes them usually no more than 20 minutes, and that's if they go all the way to the 6th attempt.
Wow.
So, yeah, my daughter is in my 10th grade choir class, and she has the advantage also and disadvantage of having her bedroom right next door to me in my studio here. And so on those snow days, if she turns something in that is subpar, I can holler, Clara, go do it again. And she has to go do it again. So that works out. But if she's getting to the point where, my kid is definitely not like one of our better readers. She's average to above average, but she's not like top flight or anything. And she knows that it wouldn't hurt her feelings. Those assignments take her 6 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's not that bad.
Sure. That's really cool. I didn't know Sight Reading Factory had like a grading function. I'll have to look into that.
It's new.
I'm learning so much about Sight Reading Factory in this episode. That's great.
Yeah, it wasn't my attempt or my intent.
Sure.
However, I was a big Sight Reading Factory nerd before I ever was doing a podcast. I started using it like from the very beginning.
Sure.
When they first came out, and when I started a podcast, I reached out to them and said, like, can I like send people your way? And they were like, sure.
Awesome.
So yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just curious too. Like one of our big things on our show is just talking about how you love on your kids and how you know your kids, and just like what's the vibe with the kids, right? Because there isn't any music without the kids.
Yeah,
So I'm
that's
just
awesome.
curious, like, I mean, I'm sure this could be like a harder question to answer since we're starting from scratch with Chris, right? Because we don't know you, but what's the vibe? Like if you talk to like one of your seniors that is like your like top kids that would like, do anything. If you said jump, they say how high, like, and
Hmm.
they say, why did you come back to choir for all these years? Like, what is it with is it Mr. Muntz or
Yep,
Muncie? Okay, I didn't know if it was
months.
Muntz or
Yeah,
Muncie. Okay, so like,
yep.
what is it about Mr. Muntz that makes you come back, and like, what's about choir? Like, what would they say?
So that's interesting, and I'm going to want to know that from you too, because I think that's a really good question. So, if you're on the video version, you can see a sign up behind me that says "Thank you for your mistake." Um, that's uh, so I think a lot of the students that have gone all the way through the program and are still there after their senior year, that's one of the things that they would probably talk about. Is they would talk about the idea that we feel safe to learn in here because the entire pedagogy is built around the idea that as singers, if we don't just open our mouth and let noises come out, whether we know for sure that they're going to be right or wrong, then everything about singing becomes harder because it's there. We're because of kind of like we talked about when we first signed on about those differences between the sixth grade trumpet player and the puberty instruments and all that kind of stuff. Like there are the human voice is also so dramatically affected by things like mood, by like a throat can seize up because a kid is so nervous. As a kid who was band and choir, I was always way more nervous to sing in front of people than I was to play my saxophone. Like my saxophone, I could detach myself slightly emotionally from the noise that it made. If I was out of tune, I could just be like, oh, I'm going to tighten my ligature and wet the reed a little bit more and blow. It's the horn's fault. I'll just. But if I sound flat in choir, that's me. Like that's my voice that is insufficient. And so I work really hard to create an environment from the beginning of ninth grade that the only real mistakes that you would get in trouble for are things like not being engaged, not making an attempt to be on the right page at the right measure at the right time, because any kid with no talent at all can do those things. Like we make choices about how we rehearse, and you will be held accountable for those things, but you will never be punished or chastised because your voice cracked or because you sang too loud once, or whatever. Like we're experimenting, we're creating a sound laboratory every day.
Sure.
And so they feel like they can come and be themselves because their voice is an expression of that. And then I would also just add that we do a lot of because our reading is pretty good. We have time to kind of sit and talk and like figure out what the poetry means, and those types of conversations in choir oftentimes really bring a lot of vulnerability out of kids to get to the point where they like we've talked about so many deep issues by 12th grade that we really do feel like we know each other pretty darn well. Right now, because of snow days and stuff like we talked about before, I feel like our kids are missing out on that because we are cramming for festival right now and we
Okay.
don't have time to talk, stuff like that. But in
Sure.
general, I think that those are the things that they would say.
Sure. I played in a backup band for a show choir when I was in college, and this was like when I was studying to be a band director, and I was really like envious of the like emotional intimacy that a choir could create, and
Hmm.
especially in a show choir and how close they are. I mean, I don't know if like the playing an instrument is inherently like that as compared to singing. And I think that the bond of a choir is like really cool, and so many choirs do that so well, and I hope
Hmm.
that bands can kind of emulate that at some point.
If
uh,
they sang every day, they would be more vulnerable with each other.
there you go, there you
Because I
go.
think that I do seriously think that's part of it. I think that it's like when I sing in front of you, I am really exposing very raw things because our identities are connected to our voices in a lot of ways. It's like that I hear myself as myself in my head when I think of like my own thoughts and
Sure.
stuff like that. So it's like kids are having to express their true self when they
Sh-
sing, and I think that and the other part is the poetry. But since you said that you felt that like envious about the choir, what do you do then to try to compensate that? How do you build your culture in a band to try to get as close to being choir-like as you can. I'm just teasing.
The body, if you're not watching the video, the body language is very tongue in cheek. It's good. We spend so much dang time together. I mean, marching band in Indiana is pretty crazy. Marching band in Texas is pretty crazy. And especially in the last 10 years, like Drum Corps International and, all these high schoolers are coming up with these incredible shows. So the rehearsal time is just immense. So we're running and gunning in August or in July. So we're spending a ton of time with each other all the time. And I've tried to figure out, I still kind of consider myself a young teacher, even though I'm on year 8. I've really tried to figure out how can I best serve the kids as a teacher, but also as a person, and just trying to find time, as you said, to just talk. And most of the time it's not during class, it's during the setup time or during a passing period, or when I see a kid in the hallway or we're walking back somewhere after rehearsal. That's when I try and make those things happen. On the other side of this, teaching a jazz band, you're talking about being vulnerable in front of your classmates. We improvise every day. And I feel like that's a pretty, intense level of vulnerability, that you're making music up on the fly in front of your classmates. And I've been really intentional this year about being more noisy and having the kids be more noisy during rehearsals. As we travel and listen to jazz bands around the state, there are some bands that they just kind of look like this when they play. And there are some bands that are like almost talking, during their performance, as they're getting evaluated, they're doing this and egging each other on. And I was like, I want to do that. And trying to build the culture of jazz band where you're egging each other on and giving each other oh yeahs or amens in the middle of something really cool. And these kids, it was really hard for them to do that because they've come from the junior high program where, we have great junior high teachers that everything is just locked in, and then trying to kind of break that down. But here's why we're breaking that down, and here's why we're doing it differently. Kind of helps that. And then they start talking with each other afterward. But honestly, if you asked most of the kids in the school in the band program, what brings you back, they would tell you marching band. And none of these kids in this school have won a state title. It's been longer than that. And there's something about our marching band program for these kids that make them want to come back. Bus rides, late nights, emotions, moving and playing at the same time, getting just drenched, rained on at a 40 degree weather, 9 p.m. rehearsal. There's something about all of those emotional highs and emotional lows that they can bond over. And I actually was a student at this school where I teach, and I'm trying to remember. Oh, very cool. I'm trying to remember what that was all about, and I'm trying to learn it from the kids again. But there's just something to the emotional highs and lows that I think keep them coming back.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Now, is it Steve? That's the other
Steve,
and he's also one of the co-hosts on your show. Right?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I got the name right. Was he the head band director when you were a student also?
He was not the head band director, but he was my jazz band teacher, and then was a teacher in the top band when I played there.
Okay,
so
all right. So that's another. I just was curious because that's another point of similarity. So when I started at Lee Summit High School, I started as the assistant for one of my former choir teachers, who was the head director at the time. And then when she retired, I took over the program. So it was, a lot of history built in there.
And coming full circle, I'm sure for you, it's just really cool, but also really crazy at the same time, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, for sure. So Jack, anything else that we should talk about before we say goodbye to our to each other's guests?
The only other thing I could think of is that I haven't ever done a show with another podcast host. I'm just kind of curious, running a podcast as a teacher, that's another similarity that we have. I'm just what's that? And you've been doing it for much longer than Chops has been around. What's that been like? Your kids listen? Do they find you? What's that about?
Yes, so they do. I do have a good amount of kids that listen. We have a lot of kids that go on to music education out of our program,
Great.
fairly higher than average number. And part of it is just that, I do a lot of advocacy for music education through the podcast, but also, I make a really big effort in class to explain why what they're doing for them is so good for their brain, but also their soul, that kind of stuff. And so we get a lot of that. I get a lot of parents of kids that listen.
Yeah.
And that's actually been a really positive thing. Now I do get, because I do shows that are on very touchy topics sometimes, and very sensitive topics. People try to cancel me sometimes, and that's always been a little bit of the danger part of it for me. But my kids have been awesome, and they usually rally to my defense in those
Cool.
situations. Somebody's mad at Mr. Munce on the internet again is not typically a weird thing anymore for them, because they want to hear what happened.
Sure. Sure. They want to
That
be
kind
on
of
the
thing,
drama.
because
Yeah.
they know me.
Yeah.
They know that, like, I'm not a shock jock. Like, I'm not going out there on the podcast to try to offend people.
Sure.
But it's the internet, and I found that kids at that generation, they understand the internet better than adults do oftentimes. And they understand that you actually don't have to say anything bad to have somebody be offended. Like, that's why that generation does a lot of, like, fake screen names for things, because they know they're smarter than we are. To put their actual name on stuff is stupid or cringy or whatever.
Sure.
And so, yeah, so that's essentially what that's like. How about for you guys? Are they excited that you're TikTok famous?
TikTok famous. I do have kids, like when I teach my piano class, those are like, general population kids. And they're like, Mr. Hinkle, like, you were on my FYP. And I was like, good, you better follow. But honestly, when we started it, Steve and I were pretty intentional about, like, not making a big deal about it. Like, if they found it, that's fine, but we're not going to advertise it. But then it kind of got around, and some kids listen and some parents listen, but most of them, I imagine it's similar, like on the socials much more than the actual podcast. They like the 30 seconds compared to the 40 minutes,
Sure.
Yeah,
For
shocking,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
But, I will say, like, we started this too to kind of keep ourselves accountable. And there's a lot on Instagram and TikTok with, like, teachers being kind of snarky, and it's funny. And there's some, like, snarky realness that's going out there. But we wanted to put the microphones in front of us to kind of keep us accountable and keep us away from the dark side. Not saying that we don't feel the dark side on occasion, but in a really tough time to be a teacher, we still really enjoy what we do, and we wanted to be able to spread that. And there's a band podcast called, like, After Sectionals, and they're pretty big, and they talk about, like, the nitty gritty of band and pedagogy. And we wanted to be a little more big spectrum, big picture, and just talk about what it's like to teach, and what it's like to teach band, and what the kids are like these days, and how do you do this the best way possible,
Right.
So we wanted to do all of that to make sure that any channel, whether you're an administrator, a parent, a student, or just some random person that hopped on from TikTok, that it can be relevant and appropriate and interesting and sometimes funny. That's kind of our goal.
Yeah.
So that's what we go for.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So people should definitely check it out. And I hope to see some of your folks over on my stuff as well.
Give Choralosophy a follow.
I think we have a lot more in common in the band and choir world than we realize, and possibly even should try to do more things that, like I said, I think I wish that maybe this would be a good way to summarize and wrap this up, is band and orchestra teachers should be singing more. And I'm glad that you're already on agreement with that. And choir teachers should be kind of building in the fundamentals of literacy like a band has to. That's my opinion. I think we could both learn those two things from each other.
Completely agree.
We'd all be better.
I completely agree.
That's awesome.
The socials you'd like to plug for yourself on this show?
Yeah, so I'm pretty easy to find if you just put in Choralosophy, which is not colonoscopy.
Oh.
It's choral philosophy, all as one word. So Choralosophy. And you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Blue Sky, but nobody does anything on Blue Sky. Gotcha. How about you?
You can find us at chops_podcast on TikTok and Instagram, and then follow us at Chops Podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. That's where we're at.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for the collab, Chris. This has been quite fun, and I've learned some things too.
Same. That's awesome. Yeah, this has really been interesting and lots of fun, and we'll be in touch.
All right. Do you have like a typical sign off you normally do, or is that one?
I usually just trim it out when we're exchanging pleasantries, and then I put my own little outro.
Got it. Okay. Oh, well, we have one, so I'll do mine if that's all good.
Yep.
So for Jack Hinkle, we're out of here.